a lot of people into working with citywide coalition when there's just so much work to be done in Uptown, and we just barely have enough people to staff the things we want to do in Uptown.
Well, now, what if I understand you correctly, your coalition is a coalition of the clear revolutionary youth groups. And all of those groups not only have what you call the revolutionary philosophy, but they also have practical service programs for their people. So you have those two things you have in common. And are you saying that before you broaden that, the other groups will have to fit into that category?
Right. That is that formal coalition, and the work that we do in our own neighborhoods, we rep to. We talked with the Latin gang, the Latin Eagles, and we talked with them. We did a good thing. They backed us up at a Model Cities meeting. It was beautiful, but still, until they lay out clearly where they stand on those issues, they don't formally become a part of the coalition. And also, of course, now the young lords would have to accept them. You know, the young lords maybe have some tensions. I know they do. The gangs feel very threatened, especially the powerful ones. They're scared, you know, all these people talking conservative people and everything, because it's cutting into their support. And let me tell you, there's a lot of money involved in that gang thing in Chicago. The Black Peace Donation, the largest black gang, has got a tremendous amount of money. The Congress Vice Lord's got a tremendous amount of money from the federal government. You know, this is a payoff. You know, and the Panthers are laying out a completely new idea. Same with the Lords and the Patriots. So the gangs, there's a lot of tension around that. And we're lucky we're not heavy into that. Like I said.
Black Peace Donation received $1 million from the federal government as a type of training program. He said they'd be paid $45 a week. Many of those guys, and it turned out to be pretty well the truth, whether it's a hidden factor or open factor. It panned out that many of the names that was down on there that was drawing $45 a week had never ever attended not one of their classes over a period of a year. Yet they're drawing $45 a week as a gang member of the Black Peace Foundation.
And do you have any policy on government funds, your organizations, you know, in the light of the thing that Chuck just talked about? How do you deal with that? Under what condition would you take money from the government? Put it that way.
Well, no strings attached. I'm not worried about it. I don't think
no, I'm just thinking. I'm trying to get you thinking. I'm not either. I'm not worried about having to deal with it practically. But what? I'm trying to get your how you figure on.
If they would like to fund us in the process of making a revolution in this country, that's okay with us. If they want to fund us for something else, I don't think we can.
Yeah, that's what I. Well, we don't get government funded Highlander either. You don't think of ourselves as making a revolution, but I think we think of ourselves more as doing groundwork, get people moving. But no, we've always had a policy from the very beginning. You know, we accept government funds, except for they want to give us money to do what we were doing. You know, just write us a check and we say thank you, which they never did. But I just wanted to,
you know, like
understand.
Like maybe Vista would be a different thing. You know, community Vista, some of the Patriots are going into.
Well, let's go into that a little bit because you know, when I say how to take government funds, we in a lot of ways we've been able to use government funds. You know, a lot of devices like we use certain training jobs, consultant jobs, something like that. But we do exactly what we'd be doing if we paid the bill ourselves and they paid the bill. And now in your case, you get people like High, for example, who's so long as you can as they don't dictate.
As long as they don't tell you what to do.
Yeah, but the fact is, there's hidden factors here that we're not looking to dictate. As far as they're concerned, you see, Yeah, well, in about 2 months, it'd be different. It'd be the sponsor of the Vistas, or that would be the coalition.
Well, they turn these people over to you and pay them to work for you.
All right, now, wait, let me back up there. United People
Yeah.
was the sponsor of
Yeah.
George Moore Presbyterian
Yeah,
Church.
yeah.
Now, first, Vista knows, you see, he's sponsored right now by United People. That means he's working under the direct direction of George Morey,
Yeah. Yeah.
preacher, you see.
I know that's
And if they knew that, you know, he was related to the Patriots, I'm sure that they'd find disqualifications, you know, that we get no longer.
Well, they know that I'm one of the founders.
Oh, I'm hip to that, I'm hip to that. But I mean, you couldn't get assigned to the Patriots because, you know, they're a revolutionary and they're gonna support, you know, it's time, you know.
Well, I'm not into that kind of a technicality. I'm just trying to,
Yeah.
you know, figure out how you
I'm hip to
keep
that.
free and use all the help and get what you want to do.
Sure.
And I think you made it pretty clear what your thinking is.
How would you, got something started here about community control and controlling the Vista. How can the community control a Vista if the government is holding the purse strings? And it's paid directly by OEO or whoever pays it. And I just don't think that this is ever going to happen, where we can take a Vista, even where he's a community person or Russia, and have complete control over this human being if the government's putting the bill, regardless of what you're doing.
Well, I has a good example.
They
And I
can
think
let you do that.
we've had a lot of examples back in the mountains.
It didn't ever work for us in the mountains. That's one of the reasons we've kind of interested in how the fine points of this
Well,
particular
The
angle.
Vistas don't receive any kind of instruction or orders or even any more than rules that would apply to any employee. I mean, you know, they get so much time off for medical care and so on and so forth. But there's one structure that pays them, and the structure that directs them is agencies that they're assigned to. So it depends on the kind of agency that you have, their flexibility, their willingness to go along with the community or not. Like Whole House could issue a set of rules and regulations for their vistas that would make it a whole different thing for us. And we're just starting in the past year to make use of the Whole House Uptown Center's settlement house in Uptown for the people instead of for Lakeshore Drive. And if the director was the kind that just kept a sharp watch on everything, you know, and was real uptight, the place just went away and get it out.
Yeah, Irene, are you saying that nobody other than the director has anything to say about the Vista?
That's what's working out now.
As government employees, don't you still have all the restrictions like the Hatchet Act? And
Not in the community district.
Yeah, well, get back to the same thing we was back to this morning.
There's anything we know.
Get back to the same thing we talked this morning. It says, it all boils down to how much community control you got. If you control Hall House and you control the Southern Center, or you control Threshold and that, well, then you control the vistas through those
Yeah, well,
agencies.
see, that is not the way it
That's
is in
beside the
Appalachia.
point. We were talking about, you know, who has the final say-so, and who's the one that hands out the bread every month.
Well, you know, again, they hand out the bread, but the final say-so comes from the sponsor or the sponsoring agent of the Vista in Uptown.
Let me tell you what why we got a problem. It doesn't work that way in Appalachia. The sponsor is not the person who has the final say. The veto power, the exercise of the governor, for example, who has authority under the law to decide we have any vistas in the state or not.
One by one.
And
also to withdraw them one by
Yeah,
one.
they could say you have no vistas or you can't have this vista. Now, evidently, your governor doesn't exercise that prerogative.
See, they were trying to get rid of all the vistas in Illinois. The governor would sign it.
But he still has this authority to do so.
He's done exercise.
Sure, he's got the authority to get rid of them. You know,
He's got the authority to get his brains blown out too, you know.
He's got the authority to get rid of anybody.
I think that's the difference. I think there, the governor just turns over the agencies and says, that's it. In Appalachia, the governor knows, as all you guys, all these people had this experience, and you know, they
Who's the governor,
Kentucky.
would it be?
Yeah, like,
No,
you know, in Ohio, Rhodes said no more visitors work on welfare rights. You know, you'll die.
well, that's the same old lady that came down in Virginia too.
Yeah, in Virginia and Ohio, you know, no visitors are allowed to work on welfare rights.
Yeah, we just don't have the same setup. That's it's very obvious that Steve, you say Steve got in the Harris and people over in Harlan, and the politicians and the governor, you know, only get together and they say this guy can't eat. You know, that mean that this would be that's an example. So they do bring direct pressure to on business here, and they say you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, but you're right what the sponsor said. So you've got a different setup. There's no question about that. Well, I think this matter of clarification is, and when it's a little difficult for us to follow this, how high can be responsible to be a patriot, to be responsible to the coalition, and nothing. That's it. Whereas none of our experience has been.
Well, it's likely though that the governor of Illinois has all kinds of powers that he hasn't exercised yet, which he might well start to exercise.
Yes.
I think
If you was to, if he had time or to figure out where the pressure was coming from, I'm worried. If he was involved in.
You see, here's the thing, the governor of Illinois is, and people, and I know this, ain't been doing it in Frankfort, Kentucky, and you remember I'm a Kentucky boy too, and see, I know this. They keep guys like Otis, whether it be a non-Millen or a Millen person from Welfare, Fair Rights Enactment, or it would be people that's on public aid or lottos or Young Lords or what, or Black Panther Party or even Blackstone Nation, you know. Somebody's always, before he has time to think, has got a demonstration of some type going down Springfield. And he ain't got time to think what about, you know, he's got time to
that's the difference.
Yeah, that's really a big difference.
and sure can. And they're always, anytime you pick up the paper, something going on in Springfield, you know, they keep more, primarily, you know, he sort of, like Jesse Jackson, we understand he's a middle class, pretty rich dude, you know, but that's got $20,000 or $30,000 in the bank, but he still serves a purpose. Even though he talks, you know, for the poor people, now he's still, we know about his Cadillac and all this crap. And he's always down in Springfield, you know, getting a load of people down there from the bread basket and that to the thing, so.
Yeah, in Kentucky, you know, if you go into a holler, you know, coal camp, you just talk to a few people, and already the county, you know, before the days that the county official, you know, who has very close ties to the governor, knows that you're there and knows what you're talking about and what you're up to. You know, whereas you can see, and you know, like in Chicago, you could talk to people an awful long time and do an awful lot of things and talk about a whole lot of things before you ever get word of this day, May or daily, because there's so much, you know, such a much, you know, bigger, more kind of loose place.
I'm sure, you know, some things, so, some things that you was talking about this money, maybe there's not a lot of people in one place, but I'm sure there's a lot of you people scared out all over Appalachian country. Especially those, you know, in Kentucky, they want to do little things, frankly. There was nothing but mail, and you know, you got those faithful people. And I think you told me the experience that happened in 1932 about this. If you could get, you know, to those people and all of them just decide that they was going to live there in Springfield on the governor's doorstep. It was in Frankfort on the governor's doorstep. do or die, I'm sure some kind of deal would be made somewhere. That's what I do.
Yeah, but when we talk about community control, I think we're talking about two different things here.
I know, but
Because community control to me and down in eastern Kentucky would mean if if the people are gonna control that community, they don't control, such things as Vista, that would be the last thing on earth they wanted anyway. But to me, it would be like controlling the resources in there. Profiting from them resources, all of the people would be profiting for them. And they wouldn't have to ask the government, for, money to pay such and such to do this and that. They would have complete control over everything there. And they wouldn't, they wouldn't have to lift up their eyes to Washington for vistas.
yeah, well, I'm hip there. You start somewhere. I mean, and some people need some money to work with, and do things. They're out trying to make a living on their own and et cetera and that. You want to start and then grow into where you just like a kid, you give them each, you take some mile, And what I was saying, we was talking about control over vistas. But you know damn well you can't get enough people like Abernathy did, maybe go to poor people's campaign in Washington, make demands. So what do? Start with number one. The only way I see it now is what you said that is happening. Our governor is giving the director of agencies control of the vistas. We control the agencies. So number one, you always change that and go into deeper depths and higher heights. Go to the governor and kind of mix him up, and tell him you want maybe certain agencies. Then you go to the agencies. You want to control the agencies. And then you kick the bourgeois mother out, and get your own people into it. And then you keep adding, you want a little more. And next thing you know, you don't want the agencies to control them, you want them just be assigned there as people without no control over them, to make them live and do their own thing. And after you get that, well, these people free to do their own thing, and et cetera, and on down the line, where they got community control over everything.
Just bang, bang, bang.
It just keep on going. Maybe I don't, like the brother here said, maybe I don't all at once go out and stick the bulldozer, but I'm a late mother. Everything I ever find, I pick on. Stick my firecracker here and then a cherry bomb over there, and pretty soon I've got my whole stick behind my oven.
What you said, Buck, I agree with that. The basis of community control, that don't have nothing. I mean, the basic idea, the heart of it, that don't got nothing to do with this. The heart of it is what you said. The money, the wealth of a community belongs to that community. And Appalachia is probably the most, like Mike said in his song, the most raped part of this country outside of the black ghettos in the cities.
We have no control over nothing.
But now the thing with the vistas in Uptown, see, I think our position is based on, if we lost the entire Vista thing, it wouldn't mean 10 cents to us, because it's not worth 10 cents to us now. I mean, Highlander and maybe 2 other Vistas are the only ones I know, and there's a ton of them in Uptown.
Really
just doing anything. And if we lost that, we wouldn't lose that much. We could pay Highlander salary today out of the Patriots, it'd be somewhat less, And anybody else that is doing work, we'll get the money for them by hook or crook, But the whole thing is, if the government, if we can hustle some money out of the government, we're going to do it. That's just like this thing with Vistas. It's just off on the fringe of our basic idea, I think.
The only reason I said that, I was agreeing with you too. The only reason I said that, I was relating. They was talking about, he started out something Vista control. I was telling him to go on control Vistas. Well, that's what I was saying.
Yeah. But I just want to clear up the difference between now.
But community control.
That's how it's run in different places. So
Yeah.
that's not basic discussion, but
Yeah.
I
know, but I was just
we
trying
with
to.
Andy. It's not.
No, I was trying to relate to
Spend a lot of
that.
time on it. If you use it, you can't. Well, no, but use something else.
On the other hand, I see what Buck's saying.
Yeah, but to do what Buck's saying, which we all with more or less agree. In this country, because of the nature of the economic system, ownership and control is not localized. Appalachia, for example, people that control those mines, probably in the Mediterranean on a vacation. You see, so I've never been to Appalachia. They might not even know that they own them. You know, it's so far away. Now, to control a local community in the light of this fact, raise a question of, you know, what a small group alone could do, or what, you know, what any local community could, how it would work. So obviously, to start with, it wouldn't work like Buck says, because there's not the power there that could get it to control. But it could work on other levels, and immediately, at certain levels, I think we could figure out where you could get the people together. They see something that they could control, and in controlling that something, they could get radicalized in their understanding of the nature of society to the place where they would inevitably know that they had to, you know, have strength outside their own holler, outside their own county, outside their own state, as they grow along. And if by starting at some very specific thing, very limited thing, would start that process, and then you could somehow get people to understand that the goal that Buck outlined is what you're really after, then you'd be on the way, and people would find ways to link up, find ways to bring this about. And this seems to me is about, you know, what we're trying to deal with in Appalachia. How do you start something that won't dead end short of what Buck's talking about? You know, you can sometimes kill an organization by winning the victory at the end of it. A lot of good organizations, national organizations in the country, the populist movement probably went out of business because it was victorious in certain specific instances. The people were fighting for very specific monetary, it was a big monetary fight. It had to do with gold and silver, paper money. That weakened the populist movement to the place where they were to divide people on racism, which they were unified at one time. By the way, since I mentioned the populist movement, it's a man that I ran into out in Texas who's writing a book now on some old records he found in the early days of the populist movement in Texas, where it almost went revolutionary. It was just a hair's difference. It was a big fight, and the turning point was when they lost sight of what Buck was talking about. The fight was over: do we keep these long-range goals? You know, take a real position on ownership of property and this whole business of socialism philosophy, or do we set our goals in a limited way, get more people, and work for these specific goals around which we can rally a lot of people and we can win? And the fight was so close, it just a hair's breadth, and it went towards a limited goal, broader base, and we never know what would happen if that fight hadn't been lost. I can't go in detail, but I spent a couple hours with this guy, and I got so darn excited I couldn't sleep. And he was reading me some of these documents and he just could have been another way. Well, what I'm saying is that any kind of organization, any kind of effort, it seems to me has to combine, you know, feeding hungry people, a daycare center, health clinics, which is where the people are at the time. You've got to meet their needs with a direction or goal that keeps people from you know, ending up somewhere and say we won. And that's something that we've never done in this country, so we never quite worked out the way of doing it. We've had people who did the feeding the people bit, we had people who had all the revolutionary theories, and they never got together. And you know, nothing's happened to people because those two things that weren't tied together. And so what I've always struggled with is my own mind is how you get something that starts where people are and then moves towards, you know, what kind of where there's complete control of our lives to controlling economic resources and everything. And one reason we're digging in as we are here at Highlander on a basic level is you know, to get a kind of a down in the basement start and get rid of some of the build up, and in the hopes that you know, we might make some contribution towards this idea, tying these two things together. And the part of the problem is that some people at any given time are not ready for understanding the long range thing, and pretty soon organizations, you know, begin to cater to that kind of thinking, like Papa's movement did, and it dead ends, you know, and without any basic changes. And you know, you're fighting for something that's off there somewhere. Sooner the better, but you can't put it on the calendar. And you're dealing with people right here today, hungry, and how do you tie those two things together? And it's quite obvious that you can't tie it together without educating the people, or helping the people get educated out of this process. Otherwise, you can't do it. That's why I was concerned about how you were tying these things together in the Patriots. You know, like that's why I said the question. Somebody's, or a combination of somebody's, or some groups, you know, if we all keep kind of in touch and learn from each other, you know, get that little clearer than somebody else, and the rest of people can learn from whoever's got the clearest, clearest approach to this thing. And
You know, like the people that I met in Chicago that leave the South, you know, I can relate to them. You know, it seems like when they begin to understand a few things down here, then they leave. You know, and they should be staying here and dealing with the problems. You know, like I met several guys that worked in the coal mines, you know, that just said they wasn't going to take it anymore, you know, so they left. And they understood how the country was run, you know. And they said one reason they left is that the other people down there wouldn't listen, you know. I think it's, you know, to try to get these people to either come back or you stay here and not leave. I don't know, maybe there's pressures put on them.
no, I was thinking about that. I don't know if my thinking's right or not, but I think if we had something going here in Appalachia, it was worth the fight, you know, and worth staying for and fighting for and dying for. A lot of people leave and stay. They don't see any hope. It's like, you know, they call it, we talked about last night in your movie, who gave up right before you got going and went off and finally got killed. I think a lot of people leave, not just for economic hardships. People put up with a lot of things, got something to believe in, but because they don't see any hope. And I think if we can do something out there to give people hope, there's a place to stay and fight, and we got something going. I think a lot of people will stay. I don't think many people are going to stay unless they have some hope of changing things. You know, not terribly exciting, and you know, better yourself economically somewhere, getting more action somewhere else. But I'm absolutely convinced that if we could get something moving in Appalachia, not only would people stay, but the people would come back. You know, hell, we could raid your outfit if we had something going so exciting down here that you couldn't stay out of it. You know, people would begin to say, well, I think I'll go back home. See, it's the thing that things are cooking down there. But short of that, I don't see how you solve that problem. I don't see how you. So you got to start with what you have and get something built up in a place where it begins to move, begins to look good. And I think that's a possibility. You know, a probability. There's some. You know, if you ask me to document that, you know, it'd be very difficult. But there's signs, you know, they're kind of little things, straws in the wind, so to speak.
How about the coalition in Knoxville? Is that at all doing anything? Cowan's here, of course.
No.
The New Democratic Coalition?
No.
That's not doing anything.
No. They just play around with the
Yeah.
What is it?
This is the only thing that's going in our neck of the woods, which is real South Tennessee, just a few miles from the Alabama border. This is, well, it's called the Black Coalition down there, but it's mainly a bunch of people that supported McCarthy last year, and they're trying to form a new Democratic Party in the state.
What kind of people are those?
What it is down in our neck of the woods are a number of blacks from A&I, from Tennessee and A&I, and they're the leaders really, and a bunch of former McCarthy people, the leader of whom is up here, Roger Cowan in Knoxville. And of course right now we're working like mad trying to get Francis Spaulding, who's an old friend of Highlander, in as a magistrate and in our district, and will be the first woman with an important point. The county court runs the whole district, money, everything, and there's 16 now after reapportionment. We're trying to get her that job, and it's political. It's done on a political basis. Eventually, of course, it'll probably fight the courthouse and ultimately the state house. But it's really trying to do something in the system, you see.
What you're trying to do is just tear down one structure and replace it with another.
That's very possible.
All have the same mold.
It's possible.
You know, Miles, I want to get back to this thing with Wallace. Last year when Wallace was running, like I say, Wallace to me is an important person because he took, like I said, the veneer of the South, and he used it to try and make himself the kingpin in this country, which he didn't succeed because the South isn't this whole country. But he did succeed, he was pretty successful in the South, and in the Southern people transplanted to the North. And as I recall, one of the things Wallace said in his campaign last year, one of the demands he raised was federal subsidies to move the Southern people, white Southern people in the North who've been forced out of the South, federal subsidies to move them back down South. See, and I'm sure he had a team of people, paid people, just figuring out what do these Southern migrants want. He's a very smart man, and we should, I say, just like a football team. Now, a football team, you've got linebackers and so forth, and these linebackers key off to halfbacks. In other words, halfback starts to move to the left, the linebacker just watching that man. He moves to the left with him because he wants to be there before that man gets it. That's exactly what the position we take with Wallace. We see Wallace go in one direction, we know he knows what he's talking about. Bass backwards, but he still knows. We want to be there in front of Wallace, So I agree with you entirely on what you said about that. And the thing that I think we could implement right away, it's not worth very much, but it might put some people together. Now I know young guys from the South all the time heading up to Chicago, Indianapolis, Detroit. If you ever have anybody, that heading up to Chicago, well, just before he goes, please give him our name and address and say, if you need any help when you get to Chicago, get in touch with these people. And we'll take care of it because our whole thing is based on serving people. Serving people, and that's all we want to do right now, outside of, laying out that education.
Have y'all ever thought of some sort of a center where, you know, when somebody migrates to Chicago, they come there and, you know, a place to help them find a house and everything? Because I know, my God, I'd be bewildered to death if I moved to Chicago.
That's
Well,
exactly the nature
that's
of
part
it.
of the village plan that we're talking about. A center for people coming in, well, all people, and not only that, but working into an emergency housing, even for people in the neighborhood. For instance, one family that was burned out had to move way out of the neighborhood into a church home. It's one of the few in Chicago where a family, you know, has no relatives, friends to move in with, and their homes they're burning up. Can go to, so the father lost his job, he couldn't get to it, kids had been taken out of school. So here's this family because of a bad enough disaster just being completely torn up. You know, just everything that had been lost. So this is what we're thinking of as for in-migrants and for emergency of all
That'd be
kinds.
a really fun thing.
And the other thing that's holding it back is the problem of getting it up going all at once to make a truly economical package, because if we rush, we're always taking a chance on losing the amount of low-rent housing, low-cost housing that we want to do, and also large family units. And so it's all tied in with this housing deal, and it just isn't going to get done as quickly as we want to. But this is really one of the first ideas that came out, is that we would have a complete center for complete service for people. Actually, if they had 10 kids, there'd be an apartment, you know, where they could just sit right in for 6 weeks or 6 months, as long as it took them to get on their feet and find a way around and get going. That's where you get into the tangle with FHA and the whole stack of government regulations that we're wrestling with right now.
Which means that you can never really solve your problems there, however much control you get, because you're related outside agents of the, we find a way to get other people, you know, moving. And that means that none of us can ever settle for, you know, just saying we're doing a good job where we are. We've got to constantly think of how we're going to spread these ideas. It's a good enough idea for Uptown, it's a good enough idea for I don't mean you start a national organization, but it's something we've got to learn to share somehow with other people so they can learn.
There was one program written by local people presented in model cities, and like all our programs was torn down, that wanted to connect centers all over this region with Uptown.
Yeah.
And keep, you know, real accurate word going back and forth what's going on, and try to connect it up and use model cities money.
Yeah.
And it was real good. But these kind of things went in the wastebasket before we turned around and said, "Ooh."
Well, that's the kind of thing that I think will help a lot. Let's just say that question on the high rates a while ago about people leaving and staying and so on. People are going to move around, time being, and we can, if we can find a way, any way to let the people who've had experiences like you've had share those experiences with people who haven't had an opportunity to have that opportunity haven't had the opportunity to learn and go through that. So they'll relate to you instead of somebody else. Then they're going to be much more open to that kind of thinking. You know, if you help somebody, then they're going to be inclined to listen to the person who helps them, and that person's got a real philosophy. They're not going to be turned off as fast as if that person hadn't helped them. So we need to learn to tie these things together. It's like in our small group idea, like get one group going, we want to move them, some of those people around to talk to another group and mix them up. Well, we need to do that on an Appalachia, Chicago basis, you see, and eventually think in terms of other groups. so we began to get this breadth that's necessary to do, what you were talking about, get some strength on this thing. But that doesn't mean in the meantime, anybody that can go ahead doesn't go ahead as far as they can, because other people can learn from that, provided they share it. We have to find a way of sharing it. But I've known some wonderful things that have happened and just died down. Nobody ever found out about it, ever knew anything about them. And they would have sparked people everywhere. Well, not everywhere, but a lot of people had known about them. We missed the boat a lot of times on not sharing these experiences. And this kind of thinking is based on an idea that the best education isn't something reading a book or somebody telling somebody something, but an experience that people can have that will educate them. And there are not enough opportunities to give people experiences which educate them in the way we want them educated. They get educated in the wrong way instead of, from our point of view, the right way. And kind of being kind of missionaries about what you're doing. Really, it's good enough if you want to share it. We'll find some way to not impose it on people, but to share it with and learn from them. Get ideas from them. But the most developed groups can speed the progress of the least developed groups. If we can find some way of sharing this.
We talked about that briefly in regards to the village ones who thought we had a little time to sit around and daydream. And we talked about having once got this thing completed, or at least to a point where we had it all in paper, all the roots and breakthroughs, which some we have accomplished and others we know we still have to work with government agencies like FHA and all that stuff we're dealing with. Once this is all accomplished, then it'll be all lined up. The next group that does it is still going to have a hell of a lot of work on their hands. But a lot of the steps will have already been taken care of. It'll be all written down on a piece of paper. This is who you see, and this is what you write, and you go straight ahead instead of having to knock down a couple of those things.
Yeah, now the beauty of your idea is that here's a poor people's group doing something, going to share it with other poor people's group. It won't work if some college professors get together in a planning session or some government people get together and do that. It's the same thing. Say, here's the way to do it. Nobody pays any attention to it. But they'll pay attention if it's people like themselves. Now, this is something that we've certainly learned at Highlander, that poor people talk to poor people, learn from poor people. And not about it just to say, here's something that somebody says is a good idea, because most of these ideas have proven to be not good, so they don't even take a good one when it comes along, because they just don't trust it, but they would trust people like themselves.
Can you two guys talk a little more about your education program? Like, there are two questions I had come to mind. Do the young guys who come from the mountains have an opportunity to sit down and talk about what's happened to them back home and what's happened to other people back home, and what they might eventually want to do about that? And the other thing is how the group determined came on the Mao book as its text. I was wondering how that decision was made.
Well, I think the reason we came on the Mao book is because it speaks of people, It speaks for people, and it speaks of revolution,
But how was that decided? Who determined?
I don't really know how it was decided.
It was, it's not a matter of policy. It's a matter of fact. The way we came upon the Mao book, now, I'll tell you flat out that a lot of us, myself included, as short ago as a year ago, were anti-communist. In the course of that time, we've learned a lot of things. In the course of that time, we got hooked up with the Black Panther Party. Panthers, they come around, they always had this thing sticking out of their pocket, And every chance they got, they'd open it up and quote out. Now, the quotes make sense. And I'm just, it knocks me out every time I read this book. Because every time I read it, it relates to the work that I'm doing. It goes into questions. I mean, it's not a propaganda book. It's a book that runs down the well, it is propaganda. I mean, it's propaganda that's based on the nature of people, the nature of associations of people. And the way we began to use it was people started to read it. And the ideas in it, clarified our work. So not as a matter of policy, but as a matter of fact, it became a text. Now, it's not a matter of policy if this is our text. We don't have any set text, but this is the basis for a lot of our work. There's still some guys to get hot about reading this, but I would say the majority of people in the group accept it now. And it's not like we've completely answered that question of anti-communism. There's a lot of our guys that still are hung up on this idea that communism is such a terrible thing. And we can't guarantee it either, but we're just beginning to think that it's not such a terrible thing, that we were brainwashed, that we were never allowed to even think about what communism actually stood for, And just when you realize that, when you realize that you were brainwashed, then you start to say, well, by God, I better read it, just to see really what's to it. And the more we read it, the more it makes sense. The thing about the South, now we don't have an education policy around it. And part of the reason is that, like I say, a lot of our guys are natives to Chicago. And they, standardly, when we start talking all about the South, they get mad and say, wait a second, man, I'm from Chicago, I've never been down south. I said, man. But the standard relation to people, a lot of the talk, focuses on why people left the South and this and that. Bill Freshman, that was one of his main topics. He's not working for us right now, but he was very good in running down what happened to the South and so forth. We'd like to use, I think a book like Cardle's would be a beautiful book to use. However, it's much harder to use than this, which is segmented and laid out in nice little short sections. To go into Cardle's book, it'd take a long time. People kind of have to read it. But what's happening here this weekend, I think is very important. I'd like to take some of our young guys, and have them come down here to Highlander and really start to go into what has happened to the South. I think it's a very important thing. I'm really kind of excited to know what's happening.
I don't think some of the things that happen in the South or in Appalachia people could get involved in, but the struggles to do something about those things they get, but take strip mining. That's not ever going to be a Chicago problem. But
it is too.
The struggle around strip mining and how people organize and what they're trying to do and what strip mining does to their land, human beings, they can relate to. And people in Appalachia, some of the things that you're struggling with there that they're not struggling with, tenant problems, but the struggle around it they can learn from and relate to, because it has to do with human beings. So I think it is a very good possibility of learning from each other and strengthening each other's determination to do things around whatever's a real issue. If it's real for somebody, it's real. Hell, it's the people dealing with their problems, and people can understand them. It's a common language.
I wish I knew how, there could be something started or something big. The South is, I think that, from my opinion, is if you're speaking of even like community control, is that, you have to get over the whole racist bit.
Yeah, I've talked about that a lot.
The Southerners can't take over Uptown. It's got to be a mixed combination of people that feel the same way. And even like a revolution. We know that the white people could never have a revolution by themselves. Black people couldn't. It's the whole thing of like teaching unity. Even like the Bible says, you know, preaches brotherhood, but you can also find things in it that preach violence, you know. I think that, you know, you somehow have to get to the people's problems, you know, and show the people that their problems may be put in a different way than the black man's problems, you know, but it's still pretty much the same problems. And that they look down on people, you know, because they're given a little bit more power. You know, it's like we were talking, you know, remember when we were talking about the Civil War? And like there was also white slaves, the soldiers were white slaves. You know, they were, except they were given a little bit more power, and they didn't realize it. You know, or maybe they were trustees or something. But that's one of the things that we have learned is to really, you know, teach unity.
How do you go about doing teaching you? How do you deal with that situation?
Well, you see,
Practically now, what?
like I run into a lot of people that, you know, like at one time I was really racist, you know. The people that I ran into is I just got them to compare their problems with, you know, maybe the black man's problems, you know, and then try to make them see how, you know, it's just put in a different way, but yet it's still the same problems. You know, such as a lot of cases, you know, welfare or work. You know, it's a very difficult thing to work with, especially with Southern people.
You're talking about doing this one-to-one in your conversations?
Yeah. Because, you know, I would never be able to sit down with a group, you know, group of people and talk about that. Because I doubt if I could even get them to understand it. You know, it's like, okay, like, say, my brother, you know, like he was really, you know, he didn't get into anything until like after I did. But he's not really in it now, except he's beginning to see a lot of things. You know, and one of his hang-ups is that he was racist, you know. But I sat down and talked with him, you know, and I said, look, you know, just compare your problems, you know, and just look at the differences. And, you know, he began to see that it's everybody's problem, you know, and that the problems aren't really different, that you're just taught to different, you know.
It's interesting, you know, what he does something that most people who work on this problem of prejudice do the opposite way. Most people, you know, kind of professional sort of people, they start trying to tell white people about the problems of black people and how black people are mistreated. And what I said, he starts talking about the white person's problems and how they are like the black person's problem, which is a completely different approach to that. You mean it's starting to involve the person and use his experiences to help him understand the black person's experience. I'd gamble on that method against the other.
Yeah, and it's a very important thing to let people know about institutions and how institutions teach you that. You know, you know, like I was kicked out of school, you know, for asking one question. That was why isn't, you know, why don't you teach Black history? You know, and you know, I was just kicked out for that.
Dayton?
Yeah. I mean, they just want to train you, you know, to think a certain way, to keep in line, you know. And then if you get out of line, man, you know, you don't have any chance of going back easy.
Educational system in Dayton's got a pretty bad record now.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, this is what's got me. How do you get the whites for us? You know, we tried to organize our janitors, You know, I mean, we try to help them organize themselves. There's so much in the structure.
Yeah.
I mean, they just fight you. We just got, you know, that the county machine that reaches everywhere. Economically, politically, it works. And of course, that's tied up to state machine. It's an octopus. And they're so afraid of their bosses. The bosses are all powers, you know.
Seems like you've just been taught so long that you gotta think a certain way. But when you start, and you really start thinking about things, I think that's when you become a man or a woman. And that's when you become a human being.
But you can't make a guy become a man.
Another way that we try to deal with racism is on the level of reality. About 6 months ago, we went to speak at a college, and in that speaking we did there, a black guy come around and said, "I'd like to join the Patriots." He said, "Right on." And he worked with us. Now, he dropped out for personal reasons. And it wasn't that he was uptight with our work. He just had to deal with his family, make some money and so forth. He was just beginning to get back with us. But he worked with us for a long time. I know me personally, when I'm talking to guys on the street, and they say something like, one time I handed out a leaflet that was running down about a kid getting beat up by the police, and how we were going to stand up to the police. And I was going over this leaflet with some guys on the street, and they said, "Yeah, well, that's okay, man, but actually I'd rather fight niggers, you know." And I said, "Well, that's a bullshit attitude, you know. That's just so much bullshit, you know." And I more or less walked away from the guy. I said, I don't agree with that in the least little bit. And you know, if that's where you're at, we ain't got nothing in common. The next day, that guy come around the office, said, "I wanted to check out and find out what you guys were about, you know." And we try to be, you know, we try to associate with the black community. A lot of us hang around with the black people, you know, on Clifton Avenue. And just in that way, you know, just on the level of reality, on the level of where people are at, rejected. Besides the thing Highlander was running down, which is the theoretical level, you know, that we just don't put up. And we actually kicked a couple people. We kicked out one white guy and one black guy for being racist from the Patriots. Because the white guy said, you know, he was always talking about the nigger question and all that, and he just, you know, couldn't accept our politics, so we finally had to kick him out. Same thing with one black guy. He was always harping on, you know, the mistreatment of the blacks and overlooking our politics. We had to kick him out too. That's one way to deal with it.
You know, we've got a movie showing and a discussion this evening, and it's kind of thing we talk about. You can talk about a week, you know. Keep learning each other. But I wonder, you know, what you'd like to do. You know, you want to wear ourselves out, and we've got this evening program. Anytime, you know, group physically like to break up, do something else, or sing, or do anything with it. The only thing that I kind of wanted to be sure to get in the picture was the paper, so we discussed that a little. Now, what we do from now on, I don't want to be in a position to make a decision for making that decision. We're gonna eat. What time are we gonna eat? 6 or 6:30.
5 minutes.
And so I think we better. It's getting pretty close to 5 o'clock. I just want to take a break so we can get back into the things. There's no objection. That doesn't mean you can't keep on discussing or getting in groups to discuss that. And maybe some people think, "Come on, that's great."